things change on this product rapidly. And if you become attached to something within 48 hours, you can find out that it either doesn't work or the consumer isn't, adopting it, or there's ways to do it better. So it's a product where you never settle. You never really finish an Air Jordan. You just run out of time.
What is good, everyone? Welcome to the Sneaker History Podcast. My name is Nick Engvall, and I have an incredibly special episode for you today. I got the chance to sit down with Jason Mayden, the former VP, Chief Design and Innovation Officer at Jordan Brand. He's held many titles. He's an entrepreneur. He's done just a ton of amazing things in his career. And I get to talk to him about the Air Jordan 41. But more importantly, I get to talk to him about leadership, about the ups and downs of life, and all of the things that are, thrown in front of us to stop us from being great at what we do. This conversation is one for the books because Jason has been an integral part of the sneaker world, sneaker culture as a whole, but he's also just taken on a role called the VP of Jordan Visioneering. And he's basically heading up a lot of the new things that are coming from Jordan Brand for the LA 28 Olympics in Los Angeles. And this conversation is just one you're going to want to sit down and probably listen to or watch a couple of times. But before I get into it, I just want to let you know I just got my very first book in hand, and you can still pre-order it right now. It'll come out in October. I appreciate all of you for supporting through the years. And honestly, having this conversation with Jason Mayden after years of circling and following each other on social and all those things that we do in the sneaker world, it was really great to just have a chat with him. And I'm super thankful for the opportunity. Thank you to Jordan Brand for making sure that I had the time with him. Let's get into it. It's a good one, and I really hope you enjoy it. If you did, definitely leave me some feedback, because one thing about podcasts is that we don't always get direct feedback from the people that are listening, but we do know that you're listening. So if you enjoy this one, let us know what you took away from it, because this is an inspiring conversation, and I think it will be something that you can come back to and learn from and reference in the future. All right, let's get into this conversation with Jason Mayden.
1984, Mike Jordan steps on the scene at the LA Olympics. This was pre-Jordan Brand, pre-Bulls uniform, pre-six championships, and he had a vision for himself that no one else saw. And he methodically put together a system, or quote unquote engineering practice, to bring to life this version of himself that we now know as Air Jordan. Little Jason, 7 years old, in the hospital fighting what could have been a potentially fatal blood infection. I laid in my hospital bed, imagining myself becoming Dr. Lucius Fox, working for Michael Jordan, who I thought was Bruce Wayne. I had a vision for myself that I methodically put to a process that I engineered my life around to become a professional designer.
All right, man. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me today. Obviously, you got quite the storied history. I dug a little deeper over here so you could see some stuff you might have worked on way back in the day.
Dude, yeah.
Well, I wanted to start off, obviously, congratulating you on all the success, man. After getting to talk to Leo and DK, there's just new energy. I feel it as a consumer, and I want to just give you a little props on that ahead of time. But
Thank you,
I
bro.
think that speaks volumes to where things are headed. And hopefully I'll get enough time here to get into the new role that you moved into recently, because I think that is also inspirational to folks like myself who just live in this industry and see something change that is so different than what you started with, 25 years ago, walking in as an intern to Jordan Brand. So you left in 2014 and came back, a decade later. What were some of the things that you had to unlearn stepping back into, Jordan Brand and Nike as a bigger picture?
Yeah, that's a great question. First, it's good to see you. Thank you for having me on, man. I always
Of
appreciate
course, man.
the space and the platform. I would say it's less about what I had to unlearn. It's more about, how did I articulate my experience that I gained over that decade in a way that was relatable and understandable to, the interior of the company. And so a lot of what I've done since I left has sat at the intersection of venture capital, entrepreneurship, technology development, societal change, policy change. So it's a very different remit than the typical footwear and apparel designer's remit. And a lot of that is because of my interest in education and training, but more importantly, how I feel I should steward my gifts and talents. And so coming back into the brand, the thing that I first really wanted to impress upon the team is the notion of leadership and how much of what we do is in service of the youth, in service of the athlete. And leadership is stewardship. We don't own this brand. We're not the main character in Michael Jordan's story. We're supporting characters. And so we have to play our roles appropriately and knowing that people will remember his legacy through some of the work that we get to contribute to society. And so giving people a grounding and a sense of why this brand is special, took them back to Chicago, gave them the true kind of insider's view of what it felt like growing up there, going to his home. We threw a party at his home before he sold it, and gave them this sense of like, this is the magic that existed in the 90s, early 2000s, like being in the true MJ era, not just watching it on television, but living it and walking down the street and having the conversations in restaurants and in school. And so by them falling in love with Chicago, understanding the essence of the city, it gave, to your point, like this reimagination and reignition of desirability for what it means to be a part of this team. So a lot of what you're feeling with the brand shifting, the evolution of the narratives, the evolution of the product, first started with people getting the deeper connection back to the origin story. Because you never could know where you're going unless you acknowledge where you've already been. So it was a blessing. And I think the biggest part was unpacking the concept of having reverence for the brand versus just referencing the brand.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
this is a reverential era, not a referential era.
Yeah, that is beautifully said, man. And that leads me into kind of the next part of the conversation. Talking to the guys, they spoke a lot about how there was so much research that went into the 41, talking to the kids out there, talking to the hoopers out there. And one of the things that was kind of surprising that I think led to some of the colorway choices and the design stuff was that nobody was asking for the retro inspired product, like and I mentioned like obviously like you grew up watching MJ, you have an affection for red and black sneakers. Like that's just how it is. But it was surprising to hear how many people didn't care about that and how many kids didn't care about that. And can you talk a little bit about how that shaped even the bigger picture direction for the 41?
Yeah, yeah. I would say, a lot of the color theory is based upon how people have an emotional attachment to an object, right? And so the reason why red, black, and white was so special was because of what Michael did with wearing the jersey at that time. It gave a foundational understanding of the importance of those team colors. They stand for something and they'll never go away. And I think for this generation of Jordan consumer, it's important that they have their moments. They have their colorways that are in context. They have their moments where they see athletes who are part of the brand wearing the product and doing things that they didn't think was humanly, possible. And so it's a nice push because we get to evolve and we get to find relevance across timelines. Because Jordan specifically, the game shoe is an intergenerational product. It's something that the parent, the uncle, the aunt, the elders, the siblings, the young people, the nieces and nephews, they all can have their own moment with the game shoe. And so colors are a quick way to have that intergenerational conversation. And the beautiful thing is we won't necessarily take the color and give it the colloquial name. That'll come from the kid. So we may call it varsity red. They may call it something completely different. It might be
Yeah,
Carolina
yeah.
blue to us. It might be something different to them. So that's the magic, is allowing people to help to shape the narrative in real time. Because I do believe this consumer, this kid, is very invested in co-creation. They're not interested in just being dictated to. They want to actually hear their voices and they want their voices to be visibly displayed within the product output. So yeah, Leo and DK are correct, man. The amount of conversations, listening, the humility shown by asking questions, not just pushing answers that we want. That's all part of good design. And that's all part of the responsibility of being a steward of this brand.
Yeah, man. And I think like you've been as with Leo and DK as well, but like you've been a part of this for so long as a consumer too and coming into it, like I remember, the early days of your career and like how much you felt like a conduit to the rest of us outside of the walls of Jordan Brand and Nike as a bigger, right? And I think that's such a Jordan Brand challenge, right?
Yeah.
And I guess like with the 41, aside from that color story, aside from the, direct connection to the consumer out there hooping in the shoe, what were some of the things what were some of the push and pull and some of the conflicts that you think really shaped the outcome of the shoe?
Yeah. I think it's the desire for it to be led through cutting edge performance. You know, it can get easy to retreat into just style alone. But when you're working with a person who is probably the most consistently competitive athlete ever, both mentally and physiologically, but especially mentally. We know that good product gives athletes a performance edge by how they feel when they put it on. And so looking at the work that the team did around the Zoom stack with the Strobel, the ZoomX, and then the Hill Zoom, right? Like that's a responsive two-way product that allows you to dominate on both sides of the ball. It's a mental thing. So if I can stop you from scoring and then I can turn around and get an and one, that deflates your competition. And so I think the biggest challenge is how do we put a product on the market that exceeds expectations from a performance standpoint, that still lives at that intersection of sport and style that Jordan is known for. And that's always going to be the challenge. Like we have to think about new methods to make, new breakthroughs in research and material science, new technologies coming from ink, meaning Nike ink, and the research that's being done for all of the brands that sit under the portfolio. And then how do you encapsulate that research in a form factor that is a little bit ahead of trend, but also at the same time minimal, timeless, with great shape, proportion. Like it's a lot of different boxes we have to check. That's why designing this product isn't for the faint of heart. You actually need to be extremely patient, extremely open to feedback, but more importantly, open to ideation because things change on this product rapidly. And if you become attached to something within 48 hours, you can find out that it either doesn't work or the consumer isn't adopting it, or there's ways to do it better. So it's a product where you never settle. You never really finish an Air Jordan. You just run out of time.
Yeah, yeah. One thing that I think talking about the tech and how it feels more, the multi-directional aspect of it, both from a physical standpoint and a player standpoint. My mind goes to like the WNBA and where women they are the fundamentals of basketball. They play the fundamentals of basketball so much more consistently than the men. Nothing against the NBA, but like if you wanted to learn the basics, like I'm telling my nephews to watch the WNBA versus watching, some of the highlight reels that you might see from the league. How much of that do you think we'll see in the future as the women's game finally is kind of like getting its, due credit, I think both of us are basketball fans, through and through, but like I'm a Sacramento kid, so like the Monarchs winning was like I was into the WNBA the first
Yeah.
time the
Yeah.
NBA WNBA had its rise, and then losing the team, like I know Sonics fans are listening to this going like, you haven't felt anything yet, but like I think that part of where not just Jordan brand, but sneaker culture as a whole and basketball shoes as a whole is still such a huge opportunity. And my mind just instantly goes there with what you're talking about in like the actual like tech and design of the shoe. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is that a part of the thought process and how much of a change is that considering, obviously we're talking about Michael Jordan, the greatest NBA player, ever.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a great question. And I think if you look at the roster of athletes that we currently have, the moves we've made over the past 2 years with the caliber of athlete that is coming from college into the W, you can see where, the brand is expanding. If you remember, we were one of the first brands to highlight a lot of women athletes. We had April Holmes, a Paralympian, dominating. We had conversations back in the day across multiple versions of culture, boxing, basketball. So I think right now what's happening is that there's more emphasis on women's sport, which means there's more research dollars that'll be allocated towards women's sport. And that's an area I'm very passionate about because you need the research to understand, the biomechanics and the physiology of the woman athlete so you can serve her needs at the highest level. And so I fundamentally agree when you think about the purity of the game, the footwork, the spatial manipulation, the off-ball defense, the mind games, the way that the game is just beautifully broken into improvisation. It's women's basketball. They have high degree of athleticism, but a lot of the game exists below the rim today, right? And so that means you get to see the purity of the sport, the chess, the breaking down of your opponent. Very similar to if you're watching boxing. Most people want to see a brawl. I'm a boxing fan. I love technical boxing. I love watching what other people would consider a boring fight because that's a well fought match, right? Like two boxers at their prime that are proficient and know how to reserve energy and know how to shoulder roll and know how to evade, getting punched. And that's beautiful. But to the average consumer, they just want to see a brawl. To the average consumer, you just might want to see people get dunked on. But if you love basketball, you're going to study the women's game. And I think that pushes us from a design perspective to think about foot morphology, to think about weight, to think about traction placement, to think about toe splay, think about responsiveness, think about the types of cushioning and how much pressure needs to be generated to activate the cushioning in the technology in the product. So it does radically shift how we design. If you look at some of the products that have come out, the triangle being one of them, it captures the needs of her, but also, if men wanted to play in it, they could play in it as well. So I think we're getting to a point where it's going to be specialization, where we can do things that really truly serve her, but also the acknowledgement of the amount of research needed to continue to capture the moment, which is exciting because we're at the bleeding edge of doing that. And the 41 is a good example of a product that took into consideration, you know, multiple styles of play across the W and the NBA. So it's a phenomenal time, man, to be a basketball fan. To be honest with you.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely agree. I vibe hard with the boxing analogy as a huge baseball fan. I used to pitch, and I'm one of those consumers that's like, put me in a not a no hit duel. I don't need to see bats. I need to see strategy. I need to see all of the different thoughts that go into that. So I I really love the way you're talking about the boxing analogy, because that's kind of the way I think with baseball and watching that sport. I think too, like a question that I didn't necessarily have on the notes, but I should ask you because I did ask the guys, like sneakers is such a, it can be terrible at times, right? People are ruthless, and a lot of, there's a lot of negativity. There's a lot of knee jerk reactions, like I'm not one of those people that's like, like we all look at a shoe and have an opinion on it because certain aesthetics are going to appeal to us. But for me, I wanna see all the shoes in person. I think it makes me a better writer. I think it makes me a better, consultant. I think it makes me better for anybody that I talk to in the sneaker world. The more I'm hands-on, foot on foot with as many shoes as I can get. And part of what I think about when I do that from my world is like, I want people to understand that, like, I've tried to go out and experience as many of these as possible. But as a designer and as a, really kind of the face of Jordan brand, corporate at this point, you know, how is navigating that throughout your career changed? How have you, are there any lessons that you've kind of grabbed onto? Maybe, not get caught up in the negativity or just the always crazy energy that comes with a signature Jordan release.
Man, that's a phenomenal question, and honestly, it's one that I feel I've been uniquely conditioned to have emotional neutrality towards. So you grow up in Chicago. I grew up in a very large family where you had to have thick skin, right? Like you had to be able to take a joke. You had to be able to have sharp critiques of how you dressed and how you looked, and it was all through the lens of you know how people displayed their love for you. So when I think about consumer sentiment, I would rather have an adverse reaction than no reaction. Indifference is what will bother me. If people didn't care at all, that would bother me. But the game shoe is never supposed to be lukewarm. It's either you love it or you hate it. So either way, the emotion that you display, that's your personal take. That's your personal taste. I can't tell you what to personally like or love. But what I'm looking for is a reaction. I'm looking for some type of emotive outcome, some type of response, some type of conversation and dialogue, because that's how we get better. Because as a creative person, you are taught to take feedback and critiques. That's why our process is iterative. If you take any of that personally, like someone's personally critiquing you, then you allow the world to transgress against your peace. So you learn very early that you can talk about the product, but I don't have to absorb that personally because it's not a personal critique of me. And even if it was, it's hard to allow a personal critique to affect my feeling of myself if I don't know someone. Right. So that's also, I think, one of the affects of the internet is people can say whatever they want without having to deal with the accountability that comes with, saying things that could be potentially hurtful. That means I don't have to absorb that. If I don't know this person, they don't know me, and they have a sharp critique of work, they're entitled to their opinion. I'm also entitled to not listening. And
Yep.
so I think
Yep.
there's a duality to it. You can say what you want, but I don't have to receive it or absorb it. I can just allow that energy to flow past me, happening in front of me, and not react to it. And that just comes with maturity, because sometimes you have to ask yourself, the person you're interacting with, you don't know what they're dealing with, right? And if they're not getting community in their day to day life, they may say something to get a response. And if I give them the response that's negative, I don't know what types of feelings they may carry forward. So I try my best to be a person that doesn't do what people expect. I respond with kindness and joy and inquisitiveness. And I've had so many direct messages that started off with, negative commentary that resulted in these people being some of my closest friends because I didn't match that energy. I told them, you know what? I appreciate that. Thank you. What's going on in your life? How's your family? What's behind this comment? Is everything okay? And then you realize some people are just carrying a lot and they're not expecting grace. So I try to be the person that I claim to be, even when it's inconvenient, even when no one is looking, because what matters to me most is how I make people feel. And if I can have that discussion, people can express what they like or don't like and still walk away feeling respected. That's the role. That's the role, right? That's what comes with being out in front is you have to be willing to listen. You have to be willing to be critiqued, but you don't have to hold on to that because it that means that your ego is involved. And so you have to die to your ego daily. And for me, I care more about, you know, uh, winning than I care about being right. And so if somebody has a better idea, I listen. If someone says, Jay, you can improve, I listen because I take that as a gift. I take that as them wanting to see something better out of me. And I don't take that lightly.
Yeah, I think that's a incredible answer. You talk about the big family and I'm going, yeah, like this is, we've maybe had some similar parallel paths in a way because, I even just my uncle, it just comes to mind, like bought my first pair of Jordans, like eighth grade after working all summer and getting them. But like I was wearing a size 13 shoe and I was only like 5'5" at the time. So my
Yeah.
uncles used to call me an L. Like they just told
Yeah.
me I was L shaped. And like, it was funny to them, but I was like, "Are you making fun of my shoes?" Like, when
Yeah.
you're that young, you're trying to
You
understand it.
don't know.
But then, yeah, but then like exactly what you're talking about the DMs and that I have so many similar experiences. What would you say to the designer to the intern walking in, to Jordan Brand 2001 about that experience to
Yeah.
to help them level set in that? Because I think, we especially with the way that the world is right now, people are going through it and that stuff, it affects them so heavily. What would your words of advice be to that person that's just stepping into that experience now?
Yeah. Man, this is such an important topic that I care deeply about. I would tell that person, don't believe you are as good as you think you are, and don't believe that you're as bad as they say you are. You know, don't get too high, don't get too low. Emotional neutrality is the unlock. Being able to observe something but not participate in it is the unlock. Being able to discern what's happening in front of me and what's happening to me is the unlock. A lot of people's sharp critiques of the work we do, once again, has nothing to do with us personally, even though people may try to make it personal by saying, hey, this designer or this brand, you don't have to receive it as personal. You can receive it as this individual who I do not know has the right to an opinion because they've spent money on an object or they're considering to spend money on an object that I'm affiliated with or I created. It does not mean I need to carry that with me personally. Because what happens is you start to do deduction on your worth, on your value, on your self efficacy, on your self belief. And if someone's feedback on your abilities deters your self belief, then you never know who in the future may be impacted by that choice for you to acquiesce your sovereignty because there's people that look up to us. And those people aren't looking up to me because I hang out with celebrities. They're looking up to me because I handle difficulty well. I know how to respond kindly. I know how not to be pushed into a corner where I emotionally react and just blow up and throw away all the years of goodwill that I've worked hard to accrue for myself, for my community, for my children, for my progeny, and for other people. And so as long as you're self-governed and as long as you realize the only enemy is your enemy, the dialogue you're having here, then you're gonna be okay. Because once again, you have to be comfortable with practicing resurrection. You have to be comfortable with getting back up every single day that you get knocked down and telling yourself that it's worth it. Because something a friend and I talk about all the time is that nice guys don't finish last, we outlast. And so, as long as you're running your race, as long as you're moving at a pace that feels right to you, It does not matter what people say about you if it's in conflict with what you know to be true of yourself. So give yourself grace, give yourself an abundance of love, but also do the same for others because you never know what people are going through. And hurting people might hurt people. They may say things because they don't have any other emotion to display beyond rage. Give them empathy, give them some form of consideration. Be more curious about where it's coming from. Because I'm telling you, there's been people who said some very, they tried to be very intentionally hurtful. And when I just asked a few questions, they apologized. They were like, I'm so sorry. This happened to me. And you just responded. And I didn't expect you to respond. And I'm like, I'm a human being. I want to know what's going on. And like I said, I've made deep friendships with these people because I didn't match that energy. So to the young folks out there, just move with kindness and joy. It's the hardest thing to do. Being angry is easy. Being kind doesn't make you weak. It's self discipline, self restraint. And discipline is not breaking a promise to yourself. So I'll refuse to break a promise to myself that I'll let any person get me to the point where I rage against the system simply because they poked me. No. I care too much about my faith, my family, and how I treat others to let anyone provoke me into being someone that I'm not.
Well said, man. Well said. All right, let me shift back and talk a little bit more about the 41 because one thing that came up when I first saw it and was talking to the guys about the design of it and the look of it, it feels not only with like the marketing that I see in the works, but it feels like, and maybe this is just nostalgia or some sort of subconscious thing, but it feels a lot like the energy of the 23 to me.
Mhm.
And the almost like reset the new direction, this like new, uh, just new energy. And I wonder if you could talk about if that is the case internally on the team as you're working on this and, what that looks like compared to previous, you know, game shoes that you've worked on.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned that. You know, the essence of the 23, having been there at the time, working with Mark Smith and Tinker on that product, Tom Foxen, was all about material science, construction methodologies. You know, at that time, it was considered, using solvent-based, solvent-free glues and water-based glue. Like we really cared a lot about the construction. So going into the 41, the same conversations were happening. If you look at the paneling, you look at the outrigger on the side, you look at the facets, the collar height, this was an obsession with craft that meets sport performance. And so the conditions were the same, but the players on the court to create the product are different, right? Having Leo Chang at the helm, DK leading footwear, Pete now stepping into the chief design officer role, Dom leading footwear. So it's a new crew that didn't have the long legacy of, working on the game shoe collectively. So it was really fun to witness them come into their own, bring their own, kind of emotional connections to the product, their own interpretation of the aesthetic, the ethos, and then putting a product on the court that's comparable to some of the best basketball shoes today while still having an element of Jordan DNA. Right. Like you look at it and something about it, you're like, something is you just Jordan always has that little percentage of like curiousness, like I don't know what to think just yet, and
Yeah.
each
Yeah.
product should have that because it forces you to want to pick it up, look at it in the light, and turn it. And that's why I've always said our brand is a brand of shape, proportion, light, and shadow. Meaning the night before school, I lay in the bed, I'm looking at the product, I'm turning it in my mind's eye, I'm looking at every angle, looking at the lines flow around, looking at the shapes, the textures. That's what makes the game shoe beautiful because it's a primary, a secondary, and a tertiary read every single time. And I think the 41 has done that with the texturing, with the 3D print, you know, uh, the texturing on the faceted jewel piece, the carbon fiber, the way that, the outsole now has a little bit of a window to see some of the technology just enough. It's a perfect balance of newness, but also, like I said, it's reverential, but it's not referential to previous styles.
Yeah. Yeah. That's how it translates to me. I mean, even just, before this one just showed up and I just got a few hours to look at it in hand last night. And, it feels, it's just so spot on. It feels that way. And it's hard to, again, like, I guess it's just the nature of the internet, but it's so hard to get that across to people. So I really hope that people go out and, you know, buy it or not, like see it in hand, put it on foot because it's, it, it it drove me back to like that same feeling of the 23. And there's been others in between, but that one was very poignant in my mind as one of my favorites. And I think you always have that, like, is this the last one, kind of
Yeah, yeah.
conversation that floats around the internet and infiltrates your thoughts with all of it. But I want to ask a couple of questions about this new role. And as somebody who's been in this business for a really long time now, I want to have you introduce the new title that you took on a couple months back. Talk about what that means and where it's going to take not only the brand, but how it could potentially impact, I mean, footwear or beyond as a whole with that way of thinking. Because I think it's been something that's been maybe just put off or pushed off, or just we've got to get this done, so we haven't taken the time to step back and say, where is the future? And it seems like that's what you've done with Jordan Brand, which meant stepping away maybe from some of the design work and that part of the job. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, it's visioneering is a calling, and it's born from the idea of 1984. Mike Jordan steps on the scene at the LA Olympics. This was pre Jordan Brand, pre Bulls uniform, pre six championships. And he had a vision for himself that no one else saw. And he methodically put together a system or quote unquote engineering practice to bring to life this version of himself that we now know as Air Jordan. Little Jason, 7 years old, in the hospital fighting what could have been a potentially fatal blood infection. I laid in my hospital bed, imagining myself becoming Dr. Lucius Fox, working for Michael Jordan, who I thought was Bruce Wayne. I had a vision for myself that I methodically put into a process that I engineered my life around to become professional designer. Being able to step into the CDO role was a tremendous honor after being an entrepreneur successfully for over a decade. But I also knew that it was a temporal assignment. It was an assignment where I needed to get others ready. I have been fortunate enough to be there at the beginning of the brand, but I'm not naive to believe I'll be around forever. And so, in order to give way to grow talent into positions to get people to live their childhood dream, you have to be willing sometimes to design yourself out of your role to make space for others. And more importantly, you have to be willing to go forward into ambiguity to carve new paths for other people to potentially follow. Like there was no blueprint for me to become the first intern, and there will be no blueprint. There's no blueprint in front of me for me to be a creative operator because that's essentially what visioneering is. It's a cross-functional team, not a cross-disciplinary team. Cross-functional team obsessing over new ways to expand the path of the brand. So experiential, product, thematic, purpose, community. So all the pillars of building a massive brand and business now have an innovative, visioneering approach because I do believe creativity can exist in every part of our company. It's just not in design. And leaving the company and being an entrepreneur and, deploying capital, raising capital, working on technology, I got a chance to see creativity at scale across multiple industries. And I became fascinated with what that looks like, in an economy where the value of a man-made item is going to be even more precious, right? Man-made goods will be even more important as we move towards, a future where you might not be able to discern what's done by AI and what's done by man. And so I think visioneering is getting ahead of that curve by exploring the edges of what the brand could potentially be, by exploring parts of, MJ's story that have yet to be told, but also capturing stories from consumers that we've yet to engage. So the smartest businesses learn how to disrupt themselves, learn how to grow and evolve. And I feel very blessed and fortunate that something I proposed prior to coming back as part of my journey that the company is supporting. I don't take that lightly. I don't take, Elliot's belief in me, Sarah's belief, Larry, H, MJ. I don't take their belief in me lightly because I know that, you know, any door that's open for me, there's a responsibility to leave it open for others. And so what you see in 28 and hopefully beyond is the beginning of other people being able to join this brand, join this company, join this movement to live their childhood dream. Because I'm very fortunate to say at 7, I wanted to do this and I've grown up to do it. I don't know a lot of people that can say that aren't necessarily athletes. And so I just feel imagination and childlike belief is a human right. And I want to be a part of protecting that. And I want to be able to part of protecting it through this brand. And so I feel honored to merge together science, entrepreneurship, inquiry, creativity, culture into this new discipline that's never existed before.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to see where it heads. Is there any, I don't know, teaser or insight that you could give into the LA 28 story obviously I hear it in you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what I can share is that we want to affect the lives of people at scale in such a positive way. Such a positive way. I mean, I think this industry does a phenomenal job of reaching unique consumers in their sport. But when you talk about something like the Olympics, where you can reach a cross section of humanity, an eighth of the planet in one moment, you can reach a billion people. What would you do with that? What would you truly want them to say about you? How would you want them to feel? So for us, LA 28 is about the feeling of the brand because a lot of people may not be able to descend to Los Angeles to experience the games. They might not live near a store that sells the product, but they all can feel the magic and the power of self belief, determination, and reaching your dreams. And so that to me is the biggest thing. How do you get a billion people to live their dreams at scale? That ripple effect across history of a community of believers and dreamers growing and thriving as a result of the work we do. I mean, that to me is the greatest thing ever. I mean, Nipsey Hussle said it, like to inspire a child is the highest calling. So to be in the home of Nip, to be a child of Chicago, to get to tell a story of a young kid named Mike Jordan from North Carolina that showed up on the scene in '84, and his life decisions impacted my life decisions, impacted so many people's lives decisions. We have to show up and represent for all the 88 cities of Los Angeles. And it's going to be beautiful product. It's going to be fun events. But more importantly, I think it's going to be something that will shape people's favorite childhood memories for generations to come.
So awesome, man. I got goosebumps as you're talking, and I wish you the best with that, and I am excited to be a fly on the wall as it all comes to life. That conversation about choosing human versus AI or what else. It resonates so deeply within me. So best of luck with that. I guess my last question before I let you go is there like a lesson or two that you look back at now that you would hand to the future in this LA 28 kind of situation to help people take that step towards those dreams and, kind of empower them the way that, like you said, you very much kind of have this almost athlete line of sight, your North Star, let's say. What would you say to the 7, 8 year old right now that's about to watch this all unfold in front of them?
Yeah, man. I would tell him or her, no job is too small. It's not the title that makes you important. It's the intention, it's the effort. Like I was a janitor at one point in my life. I was a mover. I was a security guard and I was a barber. I mean, a lot of these roles are not glamorous or what people would consider important, but I took them seriously because I cared about the interactions with people. I cared about how I made people feel. So I would tell the young generation, don't get caught up on the title. Get caught up on the impact that you can bring to every role. And over time, that level of consistency and discipline will reward you. Had I not volunteered to work on the Monarch, I would have never had a chance to build a relationship with Mr. Knight. And that wasn't a project that people thought was sexy or important, but it was important to the business. But from a cultural perspective, it wasn't a signature shoe. It wasn't, you know, a program with a large marketing budget, but I took it seriously because I know that greatness isn't doing something well once, it's doing the small things well consistently. So to the young people, do the small things well. Don't worry about hitting the game with a jump shot. Show up to practice on time first. Don't worry about getting a home run. It's okay to get a single. You get to the Hall of Fame with a 3.2 batting average, you know what I'm saying? Like, so it's like you just need to hit 3 out of 10 pitches and you're in the Hall of Fame. So perfection it doesn't exist, but progress does. So become obsessed with progress, become obsessed with doing the small things well. And when you look up, you will have lived a life of substance and you'll be way further than you could have imagined for yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect place to end. Thank you so much for your time, man. It's great to actually get to chat with you. I know we've gone back and forth, over social and circled around each other for going on 30 years, So, but I really appreciate the time. I appreciate you so much, and good luck with all of these ambitious endeavors.
Thank you, bro. Thank you. It's going to take all of us, man. So it's a community effort.